by being dismissed. So I would ask in the future that we try to return to the way we've conducted our meetings in the past and kind of follow that same protocol. So I would like to have that removed from the consent items because I don't want to approve those minutes.
Any other questions?
Mr. President, on the last item in the consent agenda, the budget amendment, I put at each of your places a correction to the budget amendment that was needed, was brought to my attention this morning, needed to be corrected. So when you approve that budget amendment, if you would approve it as corrected, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Are there other questions?
Also on the minutes of the meeting, I had a question as far as that last sentence in the board bulletin that's published. That sentence wasn't in there, the one that Paul was referring to. And normally, the minutes that we approve are pretty much almost always verbatim of what's published in that bulletin. Is it typical for those to be different, if we're seeing anything to be added or changed during the week?
It was added by me because I was told since it was done, it needed to be in there.
I guess my question is there a normal process to go about when you do that?
Well, the process would be y'all voting to accept the minutes of the meeting. And Andrea, called and asked to add that on there when she found out that needed to be on there on the minutes. So now it is for y'all to approve the reading of the minutes.
Who felt it necessary for that to be added?
Well, I certainly did. Because it happened. And the fact that, we can't just have a board president decide the meeting is over. We're not a classroom. I don't want to be dismissed.
I'm pretty sure our board attorney suggested that it needed to be on the minutes.
I'm just asking a question.
Right.
So when was the statement added?
I don't know the date, but just when Ms. Bates brought it to my attention that it needed to be added on there.
It was last week.
Yeah. Right, this is before the packets came out.
So was there any reason that we didn't wait till this meeting and amend the minutes in a public meeting?
No, we just wanted to get the minutes correct. That's what we wanted to do.
Any other questions about these 5 consent items? You heard Mr. Gandel's request to look at the corrected budget amendment. Any other questions? So we will separate the minutes, but I'm asking for a motion on items B, C, D, and E.
Before we get to that, Ms. Wright, on the check register, the check to ERI for $15,000 and some change, is that part of the $25,000 payment?
Yes, you're right. I don't know if you're...
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
kidding.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, is there a motion on B, C, D, and E?
Motion. Second.
And second. All in favor by show of hands? It's unanimous. The motion carries. The minutes have been set aside. We will treat them separately. Is there a motion to approve them?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond made the motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
And Mr. Taylor has seconded it. And you will vote in favor by show of hands. And opposed? Mr. Franklin is opposed. The minutes have been approved. And the other consent items. In the discussion items, we have two items. The first one is the 2016-17 budget calendar. Mr. Yandel has prepared that, so I will let him speak to us.
Thank you, Mr. President. You have in your packet the budget calendar for 2016-17. It's similar to what it was last year as far as when we're going to send the budget out to the campuses, when we're going to get it back from the campuses, and when we're going to begin discussions at the board level related to the budget. I'm glad to answer any questions the board may have about it.
As you call during the process, we will add budget meetings as necessary throughout the process. And that's to be determined that you see on the calendar.
One advantage we have this year over last year is the state legislature is not in session. So we'll know going in the proper way to calculate our state revenue without having to worry about interpreting what they're doing at the end of May or the end of June.
Thank you, Mr. Yandel. Any other questions about the calendar? The second discussion item was proposed by Ms. Bates.
Yes, Ms. Bates asked to have this on the agenda regarding vendor contracts and processes and things like that. Normally on a vendor contract, there are different ways to do it, but for the most part, the way it's done is we look to see what vendors are on the Region 7 contract list, Region 7 bid list. So they've already gone through the bidding process if they're on that list. So at that point, the district can call that vendor up and go ahead and get them to either purchase items or do a process that needs to be done. You know, if it's fixing fences, out on the ag farm or something, that's the way that is done if they're on the vendors list. If they're not on the vendors list, then you go ahead and take quotes and bids. Then, of course, if it's over $50,000, then it comes to the board, on all of those. So I don't know if, and I say Region 7 list, it's not just Region 7, it's also Bible, which y'all are familiar with. If they're on that list, then they've already been through the bidding process. So districts, not just this one, but districts can use vendors on that list, without going through a bidding process. Now, I don't know if there's a specific area that you're thinking about or what, but I don't know if that answers your question.
That does answer that question, but another question I have about our vendor contract is we passed to have a vendor contract for a risk assessment back in December, and then in January, I believe we amended the budget to include that, and then I really haven't heard anything. I've heard some things on it, but nothing official on how the risk assessment is going, and have we signed a contract, and if we have people come to do the process? What's going on with that?
Okay, to answer that, no, we haven't. That was left with Mr. Gibson. He was going to get in touch with me regarding a contract. That's not happened. And that's kind of where we are on that. Now, I will say, when I didn't hear from him, I contacted him and asked what the reason was. And I think, well, not I think, he doesn't feel comfortable with pursuing it at this time. And Ms. Wright may want to add more to that.
My understanding is that it was more or less put on hold until the board has team building training. And Mr. Gibson thought that was going to take place on February 15th, but that training had to be canceled.
There's a little bit,
Talk or not, here we go.
there's a little bit more to it than that, though. And because the way it was handled is part of the reason why he decided he didn't want to have to come and do it. And I've got an email. Ms. Lang, will you come here for me, please? This email from Greg Gibson, because I sent him an email and I said, I want to know why you're not coming. And I said, from what I've heard or understood or been discussed, I don't want it to be my word, I don't want it to be Martha's word, I don't want it to be Stacy's word, I want your word of why you're not coming. He said, thank you for your email. At your request, I'm responding to you in writing. I'm also copying the board president and the superintendent on this response. Your representation of my statements is largely correct. I did not expect to be hired on the spot in December and thought I was providing information only. My presentation did not have a cost proposal in it, nor had I separately provided one. I also communicated with Martha Wright in January after originally agreed in December to move forward with contracting. Now, just for note, we've had 2 meetings in January and a meeting in February, but yet Martha has yet to bring this to the board's attention that he had communicated with her in January. That I felt that Sabina ISD Board would be better positioned to benefit from our services after the board training session with Mr. Moses, a conversation with TASB, with whom we have affinity agreement and internal audit services in January, also weighed on my decision. It is my understanding that this training was postponed. So basically, he told you a couple of weeks after the meeting in December, but you chose not to share that with the rest of the board.
I shared it with Mr. Bryce in his office.
Mr. Bryce is not the board.
Are you there? My question is, you read a statement about this very topic to the school board and to the community. When you read that statement, why didn't you just go ahead and tell us that, look, he's not coming right now? He did not think that we handled that the proper way. Why didn't you tell us then in January?
I didn't know it at that time.
Well, what about in February?
I communicated it to Mr. Bryce, and I thought at the proper time, when we knew more about it, that we would discuss it as a board.
One of the other things that I've been told.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt?
Yes.
You communicated to me that he thought the board needed to go through training, more training before we do an assessment. Correct. Correct. Not any of this other stuff. I just want to make that clear. Not any of this other stuff was said to me.
I mean, we've had people in the community approach this board and say, why did y'all hire him in the manner in which you did? You know, and these school board members sitting right here next to you have even made the comments, we didn't expect him to be hired that night. We thought he was there for information only. And then we've actually been ridiculed by some of the board members here about that, and even by some of the community members, that, you know, we should have been informed, that we had all this time to get informed. So the man that we were actually hiring thought exactly the way we did. So we were not wrong. The other part of that process that bothers me is that it's also been communicated to us that you as a school board member, only without ever at least talking to me about it, made a commitment to this man to pay for his travel expenses to come, you know, do basically a sales pitch. And as a salesman, I don't get paid to come do a sales pitch. I mean, offered to pay his motel room, I assume, and I assume eating expenses. And we can get some more clarification on it from that. But as a result of this, I would like to see us as a board put some policies in place that doesn't allow a single board member to make financial commitments for this school district. I mean, we've given Stacy that authority. At one time, he had a $25,000 spending authority, and we bumped it up to $50,000, but never did I ever know that a board president could call, ask someone to come up and give us a sales pitch, him say, well, I'm gonna need some travel expenses, and you make that commitment. Now, you may have told Stacy about that after the fact, but it didn't happen during that phone conversation, because it's been communicated to me with Tony that actually happened. And so if we need to get him to email that part of the conversation from me, we can, but we definitely need to put some kind of policies in place to keep this from happening again in the future. Because I do not think you had the right to make that commitment on behalf. I think Andrea even said she called TASB and asked them about it. And they said, you did not break the law, but it was unethical. And so some transparency is definitely not going on here.
Mr. Franklin, when I met with Mr. Bryce in October, I told him about what Mr. Gibson said would be necessary. And Mr. Bryce told me to send him Mr. Gibson's contact information. And I did that. I did not commit the school district to spend any money. I told Mr. Bryce the terms of the gentleman coming. And he indicated that that was okay. That was in October. He never came until December. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been any expense incurred.
Oh, well, what he actually said was he was just totally taken aback about the way our meeting was handled and didn't expect to ever be hired, that he just decided he would better to walk away from this situation for now. I mean,
Well, he told me a slightly different version of that, but nevertheless, he was disappointed in the meeting, but not for the reasons you're saying.
well, it's right here in his email. I did not expect to be hired on the spot in December and thought I was providing information only. I also communicated this with Martha Wright in January. So,
Ms. Wright, did he tell you how he came to learn of the knowledge of the training session, Mr. Moses?
Now, what?
Well, it says right here that the board would be in a better position to benefit from our services after the board training session. Mr. Moses, how did he know we were having a training session?
When he told me that the board needed to have team building training before he would do a risk assessment, I said, well, that's fine because we already have it on the calendar. And he asked me who was doing it, and I told him at that time.
I think the answer in that is in what he told us that night at the meeting. He said he would never work for a school district where the superintendent and the entire school board was not on board with him being hired. And so he knows that all school boards have team building in February.
What's your opinion?
So I think that answers that question. But I still think we need to have something in place that prevents that from happening again in the future.
I just want to remind you that it was a board motion and seconded, and the president did not hire Mr. Gibson. This board voted to bring him for a risk assessment.
Oh, certainly. And Mr. Gibson himself was astonished.
I think he found the problem. It's a dysfunctional board.
Yeah, I think the risk assessment is complete. It didn't even cost us. I think that was my words, but I saw him walk out. I saw the look on his face.
I think the look on his face, Paul, was after you and Tony basically just jumped all over him the whole meeting.
Oh, no.
I think that's what that was from.
I've had a live
I didn't speak to Mr. Gibson, but it was real easy to see the attack mode that you and Tony were in for some strange reason.
If he
That you
thought I
jumped
was
all over
attack mode,
Mr.
he would
Gibson
not
that night, and
respond
he
to
left,
my
and he
email.
was not a happy camper because of the way you two were talking to him.
No, I've had a live conversation with him, neither of you have.
Let's
And
talk
I
one at a
assure
time.
you, the conversation that I had with Mr. Gibson had nothing to do with my attack mode. It was that he was completely, what'd you say? Astonished that without giving us anything more than a 10-minute sales pitch, that we decided to hire him to do a risk assessment. He had not given us a formal proposal, he had not given us any formal pricing, he had not done anything except done a sales pitch, and we all of a sudden hired him. In his own words, he was not in any position to actually get hired on that night. All he was trying to do was do an information only, and we took action.
I don't see astonished anywhere.
I didn't say that, he did. I'm telling you the words that he used, I don't remember. But I assure you, he would not have sent me this email had he thought that I was in attack mode.
And it was a 10-minute sales pitch.
However long it took, if it was 20 minutes, it was a sales pitch.
And how long do we know that he was coming and what the purpose was?
Read the agenda. It said nothing about what he was doing, only that he was doing a presentation. It says it on the agenda.
Look, don't misrepresent something, try to spin it for the community. That's just wrong. You want to talk about transparency? That has to do with transparency too. This is an email from Mr. Gibson that you got. It'd be nice to have him here so he could answer some questions because
That costs money.
I guarantee you, he might have a little different approach as to what he's wanted to say.
Okay, get off of whether or not they attack Mr. Gibson or whatever. Let's go to the fact that usually when we approve something, we get a recommendation for our superintendent. Our superintendent was asked by our president, do you have a recommendation at this time? And he said, not at this time, no. And then a motion was made and we voted. And we don't normally do that. Usually we go on a recommendation.
I believe Ms. Wright had already previously asked Mr. Bryce what he thought about it. He thought it was a good idea. I believe that's what he said, Ms. Bryce.
No, that was prior to any of these pieces in his assessment. $10,000.
And-
Never knew a price. And if you do an audit in any area, it's somewhere around $15,000 for each one of them. No, that was never.
And when I spoke to you that same night, Mr. Bryce, I asked you about the $10,000, and did you not say that you didn't think that was out of line?
No, spending money not budgeted for is out of line. Is $10,000 in this district budget astronomical? No, it's not astronomical. But I do think spending money not budgeted for in a manner like that is not right.
Well, that's not what you said that night.
I disagree.
Can I add something, or just a question? Why are you so afraid of the risk assessment? The
Ms.
risk
Pickle.
assessment is meant to better us in ways we don't even understand until it is done.
And let me
It might prevent some catastrophic something. It's not a witch hunt. I don't understand what the issue is. I really don't.
Okay, can I answer now?
Yes.
I'm not against an assessment. I've never said I'm against an assessment.
Maybe you're-
Assessments just make you better, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. We do assessments every year up here at this district. Every area in this district we do assessments on. Do I think $10,000 is appropriate for an assessment? No, I do not. But I'm not against an assessment at all.
This agenda item has nothing to do with the fear of the assessment. It's the way it was brought to the board. Even the vendor himself says, I was not expecting to, he did not have any expectation that he was doing anything more than a presentation, and we took action on it, in his own words.
Did we violate any policy?
Didn't break any laws,
Did
but
we
neither has
violate any
Obama.
laws?
Just because you don't break the law doesn't mean it's okay. There's a lot of things that go on that are not necessarily illegal, but still doesn't make it okay. We have a certain way that we've done business here for a lot of years, and when you start going around the rules because it doesn't really break the rules, it's still not okay.
I mean, it goes back to originally.
What part of that was going around the rules?
When the superintendent says no recommendation at
You
this
just
time.
said we didn't break the law.
Right, you didn't break the law, just the way that we normally do things.
We had a community member sit here tonight and ask us not to spend money because of the financial times we're in. You know, you're talking about that. You're ignoring those facts. You brought those same points up. But it goes back to the process by which we hold our meetings. We have gotten so far from the process by which we normally conduct business. It just baffles me. I mean, just like our last meeting, being dismissed. We can't even ask for a simple motion to adjourn the meeting, get a second vote on it. We've done that every year that I've been on the school board, and I came myself, Rusty, before I ran for school board, came to meetings, and that's the way the boards before me conducted business. That's the way boards and other school districts tonight are conducting business. We don't conduct business the way we should anymore. We've gone to this, I'm just going to do it my way, and it doesn't matter that there's a process that you go through. And people on this board have blamed Stacy Bryce for these crowds that come to our school board meetings. It's not Stacy Bryce's fault. Stacy Bryce didn't cause these people to come to our school board meetings. The school board members have caused this. That's how this has happened.
Ms. Wright, we're way off topic.
I mean,
The topic is vendor. We're talking about the way we interact with our vendors and the way that we hire vendors. This is exactly the topic.
But Mr. Raymond, you would agree that Mr. Gibson didn't just spur of the moment send you an email. You have called
No,
him.
I called and have a conversation with him to ask him why I hadn't heard from him yet, based on the fact that we hired him in December, and it was mid-February, and still hadn't heard anything. Actually, it was late February. And based on the conversation I had with him, then I came back and asked Stacy about it, and Stacy said, yeah, he knew that, or that he had had a conversation with you, but he didn't know everything that Greg had told me. And so then I sent him an email and said, I want you to put me in writing what happened, so that it's not Tony said, Martha said, or Stacy said, but it's Greg said. This is what Greg said.
Do you guys have any kind of policy that you suggest to alleviate this situation that you could present to us?
yeah, it's real simple. When you want an information item put on the agenda, you ask to put it on. And in this particular situation, what would have worked is he would have came and presented his information to us. We would have discussed it as a board. We'd have discussed it with Stacy, talked about what we thought we should do as a board. At that point, we would have looked and seen if there were other vendors that may have provided this service. We'd have asked him for a proposal and a cost. We'd evaluated those costs against other providers. And then we would decide if we even wanted to bring it to a vote. It wouldn't have happened in one single meeting. It would have happened, unfortunately, over the course of several meetings, because that's the way school business is conducted in the state of Texas. There's no real quick haste in decisions you make. It takes time, but we would have brought everyone on board. And we would also brought the staff on board with us. I mean, there would have been a concerted effort to bring everybody to the table on this item.
You're talking about what you would have done, not...
Well, you said-
what policy, you're talking about, I'm asking you, what do you have to, that you suggest?
I'm using this one.
problem? That's all I'm asking.
And I'm using this
You
one
have
as an
that.
example. This item
You've
is...
already said that 5 times, dude. I'm just asking you what you can do to fix this problem.
Well,
Do you have any policy that we can adopt as a board that will alleviate this problem right now? Or do you just have more about what's already happened?
well, I think in the future, if there's things
Can
that
we
we
get that
want
in
to...
writing? Because what you're saying right now, we can't adopt.
You won't adopt anything tonight because it's not on the agenda.
Well, I would like
What-
more suggestions, more
Right.
than just telling everybody what everybody already knows, basically.
Okay, basically,
Suggest us a solution.
it's a procedure. So, no, you won't adopt anything tonight because it's not on the
Okay,
agenda.
all right.
But it's a procedure that the board follows on items placed on the agenda.
Did anybody bring any sort of procedure that they would like to present to alleviate this problem?
No, not tonight. You
We
wouldn't
just want to
tonight.
gripe about it tonight.
No.
Well, we can get back to letting the superintendent run the school district. That would be the first thing we can do.
I don't think I've tied Stacy's hands on anything, Paul.
Okay.
I know that the process you've been describing is not one that has been followed on other things that we have done. For example, the most when we contracted or agreed with ERI, that process was slightly different from what you're describing.
I
No,
believe... Go ahead.
I mean, we had discussions on that, and the board gave me a directive to move ahead with ERI. That's where that came from, after discussion. That was not at a one board meeting situation at all.
That's not what I was referencing when Mr. Franklin said interview, or I don't know your exact words, but more than one vendor.
Well,
Make a
in this
decision.
situation, we asked Stacy Bryce to take care of it.
That was the directive I got from the board. So that's what I did, and that's when I recommended, after that process, that's when I recommended ERI.
But there was only one vendor considered.
Incorrect.
How many did you consider?
If you remember, we've discussed this already, I talked to 3 different vendors, and, you know, that was after y'all gave me the directive to move forward. I talked with 3 different vendors, talked to a lot of people about other vendors, and after the 3 vendors that I did talk to, ERI was the one that came on top. That's the one that I recommended for y'all, you know, to bring to y'all, and y'all voted to approve ERI, or to hire ERI.
If there's no further comment, we'll move into the action items. The first one is update 104 from Tasker.
Okay, as you saw in your packet, update 104 is extremely brief. There are not many changes for the local policy, and those changes are, for the most part, are just verbiage changes. In EEH local policy considerations, they recommend policy changes, clarify that the 4 weeks needed to be consecutive, referring to homebound instruction for regular education students. Homebound instruction, it need not be consecutive. They wanted to clear that up in the policy, local policy that we had, simply because any change to legal policy, local policy has to follow, or needs to follow. And then the other part of it is, when it deals with special education, homebound students, that determination on the, what determines homebound, that is determined by the ARD committee, and not necessarily 4 consecutive weeks. So ARD committee has a large say-so in that. And then if you look at FFC local policy considerations there, it basically, in our policy, it always designated, if it were a Title IX person in charge of Title IX, or a person in charge of 504, in policy it would specifically list names on that, and they have now changed that so that boards will not have to go back and take action every time there's turnover in a district with someone that is the coordinator for 504, Title IX, and things like that. So in other words, now they simply put the title of a person, and it says someone in the district is designated, and in the policy they can list the title of a person instead of listing names. So that deals with, as I said, the Title IX coordinator, 504, and probably, let's see, the other one is the homeless liaison in the district. And then at FD local and FEB local, this policy is to clarify transfer of credit from accredited and non-accredited schools to better reflect state rules regarding types of credit the district must accept from students that come in our district. This is specifically talking more about high school, because earlier it was when a district would be required to evaluate records, sometimes that some of those credits would not be met the same, or I guess cleared the same in each district. So this clarifies how a district will look at transcripts and give credit for students that move into the district. It basically just clears it up a little bit better for at the campus level. And again, those are taken from some of the changes on legal policy, and those were the only policies in the update, only local policies that were affected in the update 104. So if there are any questions at this point, I will answer any questions you may have. And if not, I make a motion to approve. I make a recommendation, not a motion. I make a recommendation to approve update 104 as presented.
The suggested motion is in your packet, so is there a motion to approve this 104?
Yes, make a motion.
Second.
Okay, the motion is that the board add, revise, or delete local policies as recommended by TASB Policy Service and according to the instruction sheet for TASB Localized Policy Manual Update 104. Mr. Raymond made the motion and Ms. Pickle seconded. All in favor by show of hands. Unanimous. The next item is the superintendent's evaluation instrument that a committee worked on.
Okay, I will go ahead and speak to that briefly and then turn that over to Mr. Raymond so he can talk about that. But as you know, we've been looking at a different evaluation instrument to use for the superintendent's evaluation. And I know that this has been discussed at a couple of other meetings. And there was a committee put together by 3 board members, Mr. Raymond, Mr. Kenna, and Mr. Taylor. And they met to go over this instrument and to bring to the board for approval. And I will say that I also handed out at your place to you earlier the student performance domain that is a part of that evaluation instrument. Mr. Raymond?
I don't have enough for everybody.